When we looked for solutions to try to help make being compliant and collecting taxes and remitting taxes easier, Taxstar popped out at us. Autofile for us is awesome. Without Autofile, we would have multiple people having to manually process, and with Autofile, we have scaled to doing taxes in 40+ states. I'd recommend Taxstar because it's really worked for us.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. We're having a great afternoon, some fantastic content. So glad that you're still with us. Definitely keep hanging in here because we've got some really great presentations coming up. This one is definitely no slouch. So be sure to refresh the feed so that the presentation feed you see is actually in line with the name of our next presenter. And it wouldn't be Meet Magento New York if I wasn't standing on a stage presenting this gentleman. This might be the third time that I've done it. So Mr. Jisse Reitsma from Urio. He's a developer and the owner of Urio, trainer and front-end, back-end developer, 3-time Magento master, board member of EXTDN, a fan of React and Vue, organizer of the Mage Test Fest and Reaction. He is affectionately known as the Knockout. Welcome, Jisse, to the stage. Good to have you here, buddy. I'm turning it over to you.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for the introduction. Hi, everyone. Hi from the Netherlands. That's where I'm currently based. It's night, but I'm just excited to have you all here listening to, well, I don't know what. So like downsizing Magento 2 because less is more. It's kind of like an intriguing talk, hopefully, but it feels a little bit chaotic to my sense as well. And I'm maybe going to explain that also in a minute once we get to the real action. So yeah, Shannon actually already. So I'm a founder of Urio. I do a lot of training. I've been doing also a lot of conferencing, among which Reacticon 3 weeks ago. And I just mentioned to a couple of guys that Reacticon 4 is going to take place in June, but I don't know whether that's going to be physical or online as well. And I'm quite busy with a lot of different things, including also with XDN. And XDN is also actually a proud sponsor of Meet Magento New York. We currently also have a hangout, whereby.com/XDN. So if you want to chat with me, well, not right now, but in a moment or so after the talk, you're welcome to join us, talk about extension quality, better leveraging, better tools to make sure that we get to a better ecosystem. But yeah, so my talk is not really about extensions, but it's much more about maybe what Magento out of the box has to offer. And then it might be good actually to talk about Magento currently nowadays, which boils down that there's kind of a lot of different composer packages. And actually not all of those composer packages that ship with Magento are real Magento modules. There's only 346 different Magento modules. And basically that's maybe also shipping with a lot of features that you don't need. And that's kind of like what my talk is about, downsizing Magento, basically discussing what kind of features are there in the system that you might not really need. So often when I look at Magento in the current state, so Magento 2.4, I see a lot of different features like GraphQL, and I love GraphQL, and I'm so Shannon actually explained that I was the knockout guy, but hopefully I'm becoming the React guy or the Vue guy or the headless guy, I don't know, but I love GraphQL. But not every shop is actually in need for such a GraphQL API. And then still, if you're installing all of those different modules and then enabling those modules as well, then it's just slowing down the shop for nothing. Another wonderful thing is the multi-source inventory. You know it. There's a lot of flexibility in there. And I believe also that the majority of modules that are being added right now to Magento are actually MSI modules as well. But again, you might install all of those different modules, and you might even enable all of those modules. But do you need them all to be enabled? Do you really need all of that functionality that ships with those core modules? And then there's also the bundled extensions. I'm not gonna rampage about this. I'm not gonna bitch about this too much. But in short, there's bundled extensions, maybe sometimes causing issues that you don't want, and even worse, maybe some of those bundled extensions are installed and enabled by you, but you don't need the functionality, and that's kind of silly. So currently, I'm discovering, or I'm covering only a couple of those bundled extensions. But actually, with every release of Magento, there's more of those extensions coming out there. And it's not necessarily bad that those extensions are part of Magento, don't get me wrong. But I think actually that it's also good practice to start removing those modules if you don't need them. So there's plenty of functionality, but how to disable that functionality that you don't need. So meet the command line. Of course, you can just disable a certain module like foo_bar using this bin Magento command. And theoretically, you can also come up with a little bit of a command like this one, disabling as many modules that you don't need. And I'm not saying that you're going to disable all of these different modules. There's multi-shipping in there, there's currency symbol in there. So theoretically, there's also a lot of modules that you do need. But theoretically, using that command bin Magento module in disable, you can disable those modules. And for me, this is also one of the one-liners, therefore, that is really useful to actually apply. Disabling all of the GraphQL modules, it's basically nothing more than just searching within the module status list for all of the modules that have the name GraphQL in them. And then you can disable all of those modules all at once. And again, with a PWA-oriented shop based upon React, theoretically PWA Studio, or maybe something with Vue, you may need those GraphQL endpoints in there. But if you're using still the traditional front end, I'm not sure if you're actually using GraphQL. So why not disable all of those modules? Well, that's true. You can disable modules, but there's another trick in there. A trick within Composer that allows you to replace a certain package with something else. And that something else was actually maybe intended by Composer itself to be upgrading to a specific version, so that a specific bug fix is fixed. A specific bug fix is just guaranteed to be working. But the funny thing about this replace trick is that actually you can replace the second part with a wildcard. And then if you replace it with a wildcard, it's replacing it with nothing, so basically removing. So you can add your own entries to your own composer.json file belonging to a project. And this little example is listing actually that you could remove the marketplace altogether. I'm not saying that this is definitely a wise idea. That's maybe debatable, but this is leading to options, and that's basically what I wanted to cover. So looking back at actually those bundled extensions that I talked about earlier, those bundled extensions might be disabled, but then still they take up unnecessary disk space. Or when you're running a Composer installation, still all of those modules are downloaded as well. So by replacing them with nothing, you're basically ending up with a cleaner installation, and then still without all of that functionality that you were not looking for. So personally, I use these replacements quite a lot. Sorry for Amazon, Braintree, Astock, .mailer, and etc. But I don't need their functionality in a shop that I've custom built. And this actually leads into other things that you might not need. So earlier I mentioned there's a couple of core extensions that you might need. There's bundled extensions that you might not need. GraphQL, MSI, and the list goes on. But because the listing is actually so large, I've been actually putting together such a listing myself, which also is something that you can easily install in Composer simply by just running this command, Composer require. So for instance, by Composer requiring the bundled replacements, as I often refer to them, the sort of replacement packages. Replacing all of the bundled extensions suddenly just wipes out all of those third-party bundled extensions that you might not need. Content staging, if you don't need it, let's remove it. GraphQL, if you don't need it, let's remove it. Even up to the point where you could remove inventory or core packages or etc. And I'm not saying, again, directly that you should run all of these commands. So actually in this listing, you can also see that there's this all replacement. But I think that if you're replacing removing all of the packages that are removable, you might be ending up with a system that is no longer of your liking. So what I recommend you to do is actually dive into this matter. I can't make it easier. I can't make those decisions for you. But at least the pre-study is already done. So when the new Magento version comes out, me and basically other contributors for this open source project are working together to make sure that all of those packages are checked for with the newest Magento version. And bottom line, it's just making sure that the system becomes skinnier. Now, one of the annoyances that I had in the release with Magento 2.4, also that within Magento 2.4, the traditional MySQL search was removed in favor of Elasticsearch. But this also made a choice for a lot of merchants and developers out there that suddenly upgrading to Magento 2.4 means also actually introducing Elasticsearch if you haven't done that already. So don't install this, but this package is basically one of those studies that I just undertook. What if we could replace all of those packages related to Elasticsearch, but also all of the packages related to MySQL, or in general, any kind of package related to search, and bundle that actually in a single package, which is now the remove search package. So if you don't care about search, because you believe maybe that Google search is good enough or something, then maybe this is for you. And practically, I've got a couple of sites where I'm using this myself. But it again, it is not there to enforce you to remove search, but it's much more kind of like a study work done already for you to allow for at least Elasticsearch and MySQL search and any kind of search to be removed. So actually, all of this in my presentation is open source work, but it's also kind of like something I consider experimental. And once you start thinking about this system of Magento that is highly extensible, you might also want to turn it the other way. Maybe it's also highly removable. Maybe you can remove a lot of different things that you would like not to be in there. So the story actually goes on with minor details. I'm not sure if you've ever noticed actually this calendar.css file that is often included in the HTML sources of a standard Magento site. But then if you look closely, and I always try to play a game like look for the calendar, then often you're not going to find that calendar at all. In other words, there's in a default installation of Luma and the blank theme, there's a calendar.css file which is meant to style a calendar, but actually in the HTML output, that calendar is not present. To me, that's again a waste of resources. But again, Magento is extensible, so instead of just extending things, adding more things on top of it, it's also perfectly possible to come up with a removal of such a file. And that's basically, again, my point. You could just study the HTML source and start removing things step by step. And sometimes that's referring to third-party extensions. So Yotpo is, again, one of those bundled extensions. But it could also be still a calendar.css or gallery.css that is sitting there in the core. A little bit harder is the JavaScript part. And the JavaScript part basically boils down to that maybe you could just create a specific file called js0.js. And that file is not totally empty, but it doesn't contain any functionality. And then you can use require.js in its configuration to replace all of those packages one by one. So I've been doing this, and I've been getting pretty far. And I've been experimenting also with other things, but again, it's kind of like an experiment. So for instance, I try to upgrade jQuery, I try to upgrade Knockout, and I try to upgrade Require. But then after the upgrade succeeded, I ended up with a bundle size, a JavaScript size, that was actually larger than before. So not always upgrading is a right way. But I'm also thinking about other approaches. So the category menu that we use so many times in Magento is actually based upon a weird combination of CSS and JavaScript, mainly because it's still compatible with IE 6 or something. I don't know what it is, but apparently there was something in the past. And it means that actually the modern technologies of CSS are improving so that you could just build a CSS menu without JavaScript, and then it still works in the majority of all of the browsers. So I'm not an expert in CSS, but I do know that this is possible. I do know that there's other areas in Magento that still need replacing. And a couple of those tricks are something that I bundle myself in an optimized theme, which is not a production theme, but an educational theme. I place it under my own training repository. But it's useful to actually consider all of those tricks that are in there to try to downsize Magento step by step more and more. Now, some of those experiments are failing, so I'm still working upon this faster script loader, which is kind of interesting in its approach. It's costing hours of work, but it's still not doing anything regarding performance. Which maybe comes to another point, that if you look at it from a distance, we also need to realize that actually Magento, it shipped already 6 years ago, its first version of Magento 2. And then actually this Luma theme and this knockout-based environment was created. So it's outdated maybe to begin with. And that's why there's so much traction for Vue and React-based solutions. And then there's also this solution called Hufa or something, and maybe that's an option for you as well to get towards a skinnier front end. There's a lot to take in, but yeah, there's other aspects as well. So I don't want to focus purely upon the PHP stuff and CSS and JavaScript. There's also images, and I've been creating this Webby extension for some time now, and I'm working upon yet another format called Next Gen Images that is going to introduce also another image format called well, I don't know how to pronounce it, but AVIF, which is supposed to be even smaller than Webby by far. So there's always new technology moving upwards, and it's simply just interesting and worth it to actually try to keep up with all of this. So maybe I'm running through all of these slides also to have a little bit of discussion with all of you. But the main point, the main takeaway of this presentation, and rest assured that all of these points are publicly available, and the slides will be shared with you afterwards. But it's not about the technology itself. I'd rather just be it about a new way of treating Magento. The Magento frontend might suck, but it's your job as an implementer, as a developer, to make it suck less, make it improving in a certain way, or maybe to put it in another way, in a friendlier way. It's customizable, so why not customize it to do less instead of only more and more and more? And that's basically what an implementer and an agency actually should do. So yeah, I've been talking about 18 minutes non-stop, but I find it so intriguing, and hopefully you'll find it intriguing as well. So at least thanks for listening, and yeah, if there's any questions, fire away. I'm just to them. Shannon.
Great job as per the usual, and as per the usual, I end with my jaw dropped. It's always an experience to be in the presence of a great mind. So Skinny Magento, there's obviously got to be some commentary out there in the ecosystem. Who in the community wants to jump in and leave us a question for Jisse to answer? I've got one from Sean. He says, are you running into a high number of undeclared dependencies when you remove modules? I know it was an issue in the past.
Yeah, so this is the difficulty with those replacement packages. In the past, I was just running them manually and just hoping for the best to come up with things. This quickly led into a lot of things that simply just went wrong. But I think about half a year ago, I spent days on an end just to make sure that there's GitHub Actions actually attached to it, so that with every release or every branch of those replacements, I'm actually checking whether it's breaking or it's. So the checks are then done on a composer level. It's done on an unit testing, integration testing level. It's done on the compilation level. But there's other levels as well. So things might still break on CSS and JavaScript and etc. But that's basically for you guys to come up with. But yeah, rest assured that in the past there were a lot of things breaking, but now it's improving rapidly.
Very, very good. A couple more questions. They're being dropped in the chat. I think the Q&A functionality is not working exactly at the speed of light here. Any production experience with Knockout Zero or just theoretical?
Mainly theoretical. So actually, my slide pointed out, so let me maybe bring up that slide. It pointed out that I had a couple of things actually reducing files to 0. So the calendar is something that you don't need. The filter range is something that you don't need unless you have a grid in front end. The polyfill is something that you don't need if you don't care about IE anymore. Inline translations, maybe a wonderful feature for a merchant, but I don't care about it. And the funny thing is actually also that if you're using reCAPTCHA, the original CAPTCHA is still being loaded somewhere as well. So by removing all of these files to 0, to the very least, the number of HTTP requests go down from 5 to 1. And that's kind of the main take. If we're talking about JavaScript bundling, which is something I've not included, but that's basically but it's basically performance optimization. It's not that big of a win, but again, you're not loading specific JavaScript, so the JavaScript bundle is just you reduced with a couple of kilobytes.
And Brian has asked, with the Urio remove search, is this good to use when using Algolia or Clavo instead? Yeah,
so I was thinking about this myself already quite a lot. I don't know. But I don't think actually they're still functioning after removing that search, simply because I think that all of those third-party solutions are still offering a Magento module, and that Magento module is based upon the search module. And what I'm actually literally doing is I'm ripping that search module out of Magento, which leaves holes, and I'm patching the holes. And theoretically, if those third-party extensions also patch the same holes, then it's fitting in nicely. But yeah, so personally, I think it's not going to work out of the box, but at least it's removing the dependency with Elasticsearch, so it's open for improvement, to be short.
Now, what's your response to the argument that Magento QA is the core product with all the bundled extensions installed, and removing extensions can introduce bugs? Have you seen that before?
Yeah, true. There's a couple of things in the past that happened when you removed a bundled extension, and then actually one of the core extensions labeled as a Magento extension were actually failing. But those couplings were actually bugs again in Magento instead of bugs in the replacements. But I would like to turn it around. You could say maybe that the QA is to enable all of the extensions that Magento is shipping with, so that also it's quality assurance that you have a slow Magento shop. But if you're in for it only for the compliance with Magento, I think you're doing it wrong. The end result is what matters. You want to have a fast shop. And if that leads into removing things that you don't need, do so. And actually, currently, at this moment, Magento 2.4 and the latest releases of 2.3, actually, most of the stuff could be removed without issues at all.
All right, we've got some great questions loading up in the chat. I'm going to send the rest of these to you. I've got time for one final question. I'm going to take it from Rick. He says, about a simpler Magento, now that my SQL search has been removed since 2.4 and ES is the only way to go on top of still running MySQL, how do you think this will affect the community? For example, MySQL search was insufficient, buggy compared to eSearch, etc.
Yeah. So the difficulty is that we're not talking only about the code, right? So we're talking about a corporation, Magento, which is now part of Adobe, and a community that maybe thinks differently. And I think the future is not necessarily with complaining about Magento adding more and more things. I'd rather turn it around and say it's our responsibility as a community to come up with clever ways, maybe to keep Magento smart or sharp. So that we're communicating forth and back so that the community edition is still something for the community, while Adobe is able to go up market with the enterprise commerce edition. But I think it's also the responsibility of us to actually experiment with all of this. So yeah, I'm doing that. So hopefully you guys are joining me as well.
Excellent stuff. Thanks you again, Jisse. And if you will engage with the chat for your audience after we drop this session, there's a lot of juicy questions in there for you, as you might imagine.
Exciting.
At this point, we're going to take about a half-hour break. I want to encourage everybody to go visit our sponsors, including our booth, Vertex. We're one of the headline sponsors of Meet Magento New York. We're core bundled into Magento Commerce and Adobe Commerce Cloud. We are tax solutions at the speed of business. Would love to have you come by the booth. I'm giving away an Apple Watch. I'm just saying it. So go check it out. We'll talk to you soon. Back in half an hour.